Hello to this wonderful crowd. We're really touched by all the people, the wonderful people that are here. And I'm going to say a few words, and then Dee Dee's going to say a few words. This is my youngest daughter, Dee Dee. And unfortunately, our other children couldn't be here because of work and so forth and so on, how much they wanted to be here, so they're on Zoom. So they welcome you too. And we are particularly thankful to the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. And this is a marvelous place. It's so beautiful, every bit of it. So we thank them for their generosity, and we thank the Cambridge Business Association for making this possible too. So I just wanted to say one thing, is that the Igbo word Ilora is a very important word to my husband. It means a gathering place. And it usually means a sacred gathering place. And I know that he feels that this is indeed Ilora. So thank you for being here at Ilora.
I just wanted to, I don't know if the mic went out. Okay. I just wanted to echo my mom in saying thank you all for being here, both in person and on Zoom. Thank you to Lloyd and Partridge and Sandra and Bhion for sharing your talents with us tonight and agreeing to be here, to the Harvard Square Business Association and the Lincoln Institute, and to James, who's been working so hard to pull this all together. We really appreciate you all being here on a Wednesday night too. It's August 24th, what would have been my dad's 82nd birthday. And we considered maybe moving it to a weekend or some other time that would have been more convenient for people to travel. But I think given the reverence that my dad had for traditions and rituals, it's fitting that we having it on his actual birthday. He used to talk so much about how important it was to observe rituals and traditions from different cultures. And I think birthdays, funerals, weddings, these ceremonies and these rituals that provide us these opportunities to reflect and to gather and to kind of make sense of this human experience. They are built-in opportunities for us to stop and to think and to process. So I'm just really grateful to have this opportunity, his birthday. I'll wait till that stops.
I'm so sorry.
No worries. I'm just grateful to have this opportunity, and I'm so grateful that we've started this tradition of a memorial reading on his birthday, because it gives me and it gives all of us an opportunity to reflect on, the beautiful qualities that we all loved in him, that he brought to our community, and also to celebrate poetry. So thank you for coming. We were hoping to have the physical copies of his posthumous book come to America, but unfortunately there were several more delays with the printing process, but I can show you a copy of the cover, which the cover painting was done by my mom back in the 60s. We hope to have physical copies in print by October, hopefully by the 95th anniversary, and some of you have already ordered. And then next year, we'll definitely have physical copies and be able to read from it and whatnot. So enjoy tonight, and thank you all for being here.
I just want to add a welcome to all the people who are on Zoom. So there's quite a few people on Zoom tonight, so welcome to you as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Dee. It's going to work. Yeah. We'll work out the kinks. Better now than during the meeting, right? So, welcome, all of you here. It's wonderful to see you here. I'm Partridge Boswell. I have the great good fortune of being a Grolier Press poet and an advisory trustee of the Grolier Foundation. So, how's this mic doing? Is it okay? Is it picking me up at all?
No.
This is
You're closer to it.
this is why we do this. Here we go. So I'm going to move this a little bit closer here because I'm expecting that some others are going to encounter the same phenomenon. So let me say once again, is that better? Okay, I will say welcome to you here live and in person. Welcome to those of you who are joining us remotely. It's wonderful to see you. And I'm Partridge Boswell. Once again, I have the great good fortune of being a Grolier Press poet, and as I said, also an advisory trustee of the Grolier Foundation. And that lets me do things like this. So it's a real treat, and it's a real honor also to be here on Ifeanyi Menkiti's birthday and paying him homage. I will give my own shout out also to the Lincoln Institute and the Harvard Square Business Association for their support and hospitality. This is special, and we couldn't have done it inside the bookshop, so not with this crowd at least. So this is the second annual iteration of this reading, which means that it is a tradition. That's right, and indeed, I'm so glad you made a point of that, and how much that meant to Ifeanyi. And that remains central to the Grolier's mission. The acknowledgement of poetry as legacy, that poetry for all its dynamic impulse, begetting freshness, innovation, and diversity, derives from a primeval source to which we must return again and again. To put ear to the singing rocks, to hear, perhaps to know, what might be the source of it all, the tribulations, but also the grace. So sing the lines from Ifeanyi Menkiti's poem, Dili Plaza, inscribed on the back of every Grolier Poetry Bookshop commemorative t-shirt, which if you do not own several, you certainly should. And I believe James has a few stacks of them in the back, so you have no excuse. Similarly, in his 1971 collection, his first collection, Affirmations, give ear, and the river will continue to flow after the race of pundits is extinct. Give ear to the wilderness. And how true is that today, 51 years later? The source of poetry is deep and perdurable, wild and vital as it flows. We will not hear it through the babble unless we are listening well. Without the attentive listener, open to receiving its miraculous gifts, the poem does not exist. Without an audience, the poem is nothing but an idea. Inspiration dead on the vine, a tune in someone's head, unsung. And so we're grateful for your presence here today, and for that of our poets, who are here to engage us in an ancient and ongoing conversation. So too do we gratefully honor the presence of Ifeanyi Menkiti, a presence felt deeply in the heart of this community. His legacy remains so richly textured and multifaceted, we'd be here all night and well into tomorrow if we were to start telling stories, quoting verses. So I'll try to be brief so we can get on to the poems themselves. Reading Ifeanyi Menkiti's poetry and philosophical works these days, one is struck by the timelessness of his vision. When I consider his concept of personhood and how that extends to a notion I like to call poethood, I hear and celebrate the words he gifted to us, but more than these, I marvel at the vibrant community he helped to sustain as a catalyst and a conduit. His legacy of generous attention, connecting poets and their works with open and mutually attentive audiences. In his well-known essay, Person and Community in African Traditional Thought, Menkiti maintains, personhood is something that has to be achieved and is not given simply because one is born of human seed. Personhood is attained in direct proportion as one participates in communal life through the discharge of various obligations defined by one's stations. As a poet, mentor, friend, devoted champion of other poets, Ifeanyi Menkiti embodied his own dictum. Like his predecessor, Louisa Solano, he keenly grasped the essential, inextricable symbiosis between poet and community, and further understood that for this relationship to flourish, and yes, the selling of books is important, make no mistake, but for poetry, poetry must also celebrate its oral source beyond the confines of the page as a living, spoken, and sung conversation. The title poem of his new collection, Coming to America, begins, "When time was young and Africa was just about the only continent around, when all the other continents were still forming, and not a single one of them had any idea of itself as an entity separate and alone within its own designated sea. It was then, at that time, that I, son of a chief, first arrived in America, determined to get myself an education and bring good things back to my native tribe." In the footsteps of this poet's semi-autobiographical speaker, today we joyfully carry forward the spirit of local and pan-global exploration and connection in hope of bringing good things back to our native tribe assembled here, as we welcome 3 gifted poets, each of whom is marvelously deft at glocalizing, to borrow a term from Augustina Dido, our understanding of our shared human condition, each of whom sings directly from the source, the tribulations, but also the grace. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce them to you. We've been alerted that Bhion Achimba is running a little bit late. Train's running a little slow on the tracks. So we're going to work him into the program as he arrives. Gets here, but rest assured he will be here. A steadfast member of the Grolier family, Lloyd Schwartz is the Frederick S. Troy Professor of English Emeritus at UMass Boston, a longtime commentator on classical music and the arts for National Public Radio's Fresh Air, and a noted editor of Elizabeth Bishop's Poetry and Prose. He has been awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Criticism, Guggenheim and National Endowment for the Arts Fellowships in Poetry, while his poems have been selected for the Pushcart Prize, the Best American Poetry, and the best of the best American poetry. Hailed as a triumph of a collection by the Boston Globe, Schwartz's most recent book of poems, Who's on First, New and Selected Poems, was preceded by Little Kisses, Cairo Traffic, Goodnight Gracie, and These People, I believe most, if not all of them, might be back at the table back behind you. To read Schwartz's poems is to hear voices, says Rosanna Warren. From his first book in 1981 to the striking new work, he plunges us into a phantasmagorical documentary. We become eavesdroppers and voyeurs of the whole human parade, desperate intimacies of parents and children, lovers and friends. In 2019, he was named Poet Laureate of Somerville, a 2-year appointment which was extended for a 3rd year. And last year, Lloyd received a prestigious Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellowship, a well-earned testament of his devotion to promoting poetry in his community. And I think I will make mention of Bhion Achimba. We were very lucky to be able to schedule him last minute in place of Romeo Oriogan. very talented poet, essayist, LGBTQ activist, and founding editor of Dgëku Magazine, Bhion Achimba, also known as Chibuihe Obi Achimba, grew up in southeastern Nigeria, not far from Ifeanyi Menkiti's birthplace, Onitsha. He served as the 2019 Harvard University Scholar at Risk, a visiting poet in its English department, a fellow at the Fine Art Works Center, and the 2020 Summer Visiting Artist at the Oregon Institute for Creative Research. Bhion has been awarded grants by PEN America, PEN International, Freedom House, and St. Botolph Club Foundation, which named him one of 2021's emerging artists in New England. His writing's been published in New York Times, Paris Review, Harvard Review, etc. And in August 2021, he was appointed to the editorial board of Transition Magazine at the Hutchins Center in Harvard. He's currently completing his MFA at Brown University, and we look forward to welcoming him in person when he arrives. But we're going to let him catch his breath. And so it is my pleasure now to introduce to you poet Sandra Lim. She was born in Seoul, Korea, and grew up in California. She's the author of the poetry collections The Curious Thing, Loveliest Grotesque, which won a Core Press First Book Award, and The Wilderness, winner of a Barnard Women Poets Prize, which Louise Glück singled out as one of the most thrilling books of poetry I have read in many years. Of her poetry, sometimes oblique relationship to more legible markers or narratives of racial and ethnic background, Lim has said, "Poetry always alerts me to the solitariness of individual consciousness, to the mystery of other people with other subjectivities, and to conditions and dilemmas of moving through private and public forms of life. Perhaps being a writer of Asian descent makes negotiating those public forms more vivid, to be sure. A challenge for every writer, I imagine, is to understand that real exploration involves real risk. It can be scary and exhilarating even to discover unexpected aspects of one's own sensibility in writing a poem." She's received many honors for her work, including the Levis Reading Prize, a Literature Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and fellowships from MacDowell and the Getty Foundation. She's a Guggenheim Fellow in Poetry and lives here in Cambridge, within walking distance even, I've been told. So please join me in warmly welcoming these poets, beginning with Sandra Lim. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay, great. Almost forgot to take off my mask. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm very, very honored to be part of this celebration, and it's very special to be part of this community. I am originally from the West Coast, and though I have lived here almost over a decade now, it goes quite quickly. It took a little while, the Yankee sensibility, as one coming from the West Coast, but I dearly appreciate the poetry community here, and the Grolier has been a huge part of that for me. So it is that season. I'm a professor of English, and I'm putting together syllabi right now for my students. So just today, I was reading some Rilke, and I thought I would actually start with this poem by Rilke. It's his poem Self-Portrait from the year 1906. And I sometimes like to introduce poems by the masters when they're thinking of themselves as poets or as artists in the beginning of things. And so what struck me when I was reading this poem today is how self-critical Rilke is, as a young poet, but at the same time how much he recognizes right away that there's a kind of inner conviction and a great sense of artistic mission. And I feel like the Grolier and its many wards have really helped nourish a lot of that artistic mission for a lot of poets in the community. So I thought I would just start with this poem. Although it's a little bit of a risk to start with Rilke and then read my poems after, but I'm gonna go for it. Self-portrait from the year 1906. The distinction of an old, long noble race in the heavy arches of the eyebrows. In the blue eyes, childhood's anxious, shy look, still, not a waiter's servility, yet feminine, as one who endures. The mouth made as a mouth is, wide and straight, not persuasive, yet not unwilling to speak out if required. A not inferior forehead, still most comfortable when bent, shading the self. This as a countenance, scarcely configured, never in either suffering or elation, brought together for a real achievement, yet as if from far away, out of scattered things, a serious and enduring work were being planned. So, and the translator is William Gass. So I'm going to follow up. I will read poems from my book, The Curious Thing, which just came out last year. I'm going to start with a poem which is a kind of, I think, retrospective self-portrait. And this poem is called Something Means Everything. I had a long and mysterious fever when I was 4 years old. I was in bed for 5 months. My mother took the illness as some obscure anger of mine that took time to assuage, a root fire underground. This is what she told me once, anyway. I think I lived to myself. I like to imagine that I was at one time truly formless and uncaring, only yearning toward water and sleep, opening and closing. She said that in my fever, I even spat at her once. When I looked up into her face, my eyes were plain and bright, and she thought I was becoming something that she knew nothing about. And then it passed. For once, my spirit refuses the effort of understanding. Of course I could not see what lay before me then. I was a child, wasn't I? I didn't have my heart set on anything. Whereas now, facts are more solid than I can stand. I need a few more ideas. A room of one's own is splendid. You don't know what your story is about when you begin it. And a love to measure past and future loves against. The danger may be that it carries the force of original thought, when in reality, it is just what you have had with you all along, the curious thing lying on your heart. Like that childhood fever, it's private, without account. I had a dream around that early time, or was it a real episode? My mother can't remember. I saw the most beautiful young woman on the street, and when she turned to look down and smile upon me, I saw that she had no teeth at all. Uncertain, the distortion had stopped in her face. But it was like a promise, wasn't it? The prediction of a poisoning of spirit, or its very healing. I am not sure now which. As I said, I grew up on the West Coast, but I find often it's very difficult for me to write about a place where I'm currently in. It takes a while, time and distance. So I guess it took me 10, 20 years. This poem is called San Francisco. My older neighbor on Rose Street once showed me the contents of his rent-controlled apartment, just up the stairs from mine. He was a hoarder, living in a state of tragic grandeur that his circumstances did not entirely support. Recurringly, his latest boyfriend would flee from him. When we met later in the alley to take out the trash, we would reliably turn into two lumps of fear. What was more terrifying than being abandoned? Downstairs, I was a collector too, with my need to interpret and sort everything. But we didn't tire of the spectacle of our private lives, though many initiatives went badly wrong. I was altogether more anxious about being light-minded. My railroad apartment was a small cloth diary with a lock and key. It was my real life, or what so often passes among us for real life. And for all his possessions, my neighbor dreamed of having a petit trianon with a vast garden to walk in and dog roses lavishing a limitless dining room table. Of course, there was no table, because there was no dining room. Obviously, there was never a garden to walk in. Boston. So it was a little faster. When I first moved to the city to take a job, and the snows began to fall, a slow sadness took hold of me. Someone left a tiny pencil drawing of a sailboat on the ceiling of my bedroom, and I would stare up at it each night, thinking that it would eventually stir. I met someone that first spring, and I didn't love him, but I very much wanted someone to look at me in all my youth and feminine momentum. This next poem is about one of my favorite writers, a novelist, Jean Rhys. Jean Rhys fans in the house. Yay. It's now within an hour of sundown of a late November afternoon. It was a beautiful day. The cold burned down any indignation. What won't degrade, the sick and distant, or near and black, bad-natured tides of want. Jean Rhys is saying, if I could jump out of the window, one bang, and I'd be out of it. It isn't done to admit to this kind of need, but spirit needs a house, and the brief pageant of being escorted through the grieving joy of words set down right. The cold bores her, oppresses her. Life comes to bore her. She can strip a thing down. I want beauty, she adds. Hear me? I hear you, Jean. Yours is a voice disabused, and inside the cold of it, there's a sort of festival. I'm going to read this poem. Any of my friends that know me know that I think because I grew up in Northern California, I'm not used to hot summers. I'm used to cold summers, actually. And so I'm very excited for the approaching fall for many different reasons. So here is a sort of grumpy poem called Portrait in Summer. This floral swimsuit is snarling. I'm regularly spoiling for a fight. Within me, fat is always curing like a ham in a shed. I go inside and read another psychosexual story set in a dreary seaside town. There are water crossings, one too many four-poster beds. Summertime, parole for academics. Long days, low yields. The flies stream into the kitchen, bringing friends, spouting aphorisms. The only major mystery left to life is death. I prop an ashtray on my bared stomach. I should grow thinner, more of less of me, as I grow more solitary. But I haven't yet found a manner in which to get over my inconsistencies. On my way to fulfill some banal commission, I'm conscious of waiting for the season to run its course and of accumulating an anger around a simple truth. All perfect friendships eventually come to an end. Is it a story that must, at all costs, be dragged from the darkness? It starts to rain, and the streets smell like hot dogs, old pennies. The coffee shop owner barely lifts his head from the register as I approach the counter that's crowded with menorahs, crosses, and Buddhas. I meant to bring him a statue of Venus de Milo for good measure. It would all have the mixed effect of a moral dullness and deep fear. I notice this is the only place in town without a television. I like the angry pinch of an insight, the rough grasp of hard news. Yet in these very dog days, what might have been ennobling has often left me dull and vicious, a surprise I just wasn't onto. Let me read a poem. This is my favorite philosopher, Spinoza. I love Cambridge. There's always like, yes, of course. Favorite philosophers. Spinoza says, "He who loves God cannot endeavor that God loves him in return. Do you know, I think the cool silver of this is hard to live by. When there is anything you want very much, you are making up a story all of the time of how you will get it and how it will be. You want the love of God and the human sort, a big treasure and a little treasure. I wonder if you're like me, a touch affronted by your own underlying avidity. For now it is pleasant to lie on one's bed, chronicling everything in ice. Though the hyenas in the room and the real flowers, these things take some of the innocence out of the day. Want in a person is like hunger in a dog, Spinoza probably would not say. His wakeful, solitary reasoning plainly outstrips my wildest intuition. Yet insofar as my heart is a boot with a hole in it, I think this is what writing could be. What he calls nature, an existence no longer born as means or ends." I'm going to read a poem. I haven't much in my previous work written that directly about certain family members, and this is a person who I actually did not have the pleasure to know, but my grandmother is someone who figures as I keep writing largely in my imagination, so it's interesting how that happens. This poem is called The Absolutist. My grandmother ran her own business in Seoul, an average yet busy lunchtime canteen near the center of the city. I can see her waiting for beverage deliveries, scrubbing down sticky tables, enduring the smell of ripe garbage in the summers. She always emerges from the building late in the day, dark and slim, and walks home like someone floating down the Nile. She took up with a careless married man while death was eating up most everything around her. No one can tell me if it was a love match, or if this was frankly a more pragmatic way to live. I like to think she read whatever she wanted while she ate alone, that she was thrilled with the stillness at the end of her nights. I daydreamed that she was an enchanted yet distracted mother. She died soon after having her last child. In every photo, she turns away from the camera. Cover anyone's face, and changed circumstances take up the burden of narrative. She was said to be guiltily pretty and took chances. Maybe she was shallow. I tend to believe she was clear with herself, that she was never worn away. I never can picture the food itself at all. I'll just finish with three little poems. And thank you again for having me here. This poem is called Refuseniks. Her favorite person, Flaubert, says, "When you write the biography of a friend, you must do it as if you were taking revenge for him. Who says we have to live like everyone else?" She drops a line down onto the page. In a poet's household, some people secretly love bad news. Like a dog in the kitchen, she investigates this scrap. It could be a nod from naturalism to realism, or a salute the other way around. It could be just the sort of thing one writes when one feels the stirrings of happiness close at hand. I was going to read this poem at the end, but I like reading a poem called Endings as the penultimate poem. So I'll do that. Endings. The story has two endings. It has one ending and then another. Do you hear me? I do not have the heart to edit the other out. And this is called That Are. Then I became this stupid, trilling thing. What I desired was to become obscene. All the things I had loved up to then fell away in the long struggle between winter and spring. And then there was my body inside of my soul. It had different aspirations. What form does it take without the soul? Helpless in a hideous new way, and as patient as a mountain. The soul is an innocent before it. So when I say stupid, I simply offer meaninglessness. And when I say trilling, I only mean a leaving off of past sound. And when I am obscene, I am shorn of all expository passages, and so on, with things that are. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sandra. So this is me just trying to make this segue seamless as possible, and to confirm that indeed Bhion Achimba is here, and to reassure him that we've actually introduced you already, so we know who you are, and we're expecting you, and we're so glad that you could join us despite the delay. So without further ado, please welcome Bhion Achimba.
Thank you so much, and very sorry for the delay. The train had a late schedule and it sort of left me frazzled. So I'm sorry about that. I have to drink water, please.
Take your rest.
Oh, yeah, I take it off. Even the drinking of water feels weirdly performative, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, life in the village. For years, there was only the exposed midriff of the coal mines, then the lilac-trained silence of the hills, then the birds, small soot-drenched robins in the kitchen rafters, moving in and out of their routine ode. Then the myth that joy was anything more than an accidental crash of drying wings in the wet ossuary of the throat. Then the belief that, given the right circumstance, her old failures could coalesce someday into a full and brand new self. The bird, once rumored to eat timid children, had died multiple soft deaths on her dirty fingers. It happened that she was dangerous, even while afraid. It's such a deep honor to be here and to read at this celebration. So there's a little backstory which I often love telling, and particularly here it feels well fitting, because when I got to Cambridge in 2019, I was kind of doing, my friend was taking me on a tour, and we were buying books. We went to Reverend Herbert bookstore, and then he told me that there was a bookstore that stocked only poetry, and I was really kind of fascinated by the idea of it, because for me it sounded like something out of a Harry Potter movie. Yeah, because it's really, poetry feels quite rarefied, and to find it sometimes is difficult, but to find a bookstore that's sold only poetry, so he took me there, and I also encountered some other surprises, and one of it being that the person who owns the bookstore, the sold only poetry, was originally Nigerian and Igbo. So it was really thrilling, and I was grateful at the same time as also sad, because I met him first in the obituary that was tagged to the front door. So it was like double emotional feeling for me, elation and then this sadness. But I'm also very grateful that I could feel that instant connection. So I'm coming from Nigeria, and particularly from the Southeast, where I went to school, where I went to college, which is like very, very close to where Ifeanyi was born. So that instant connection sort of renewed me, and made Cambridge quite kind of less lonely in that sort of initial stage of my settling here. So I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to read, and I'm also very excited to hold this personal story and connection to Ifeanyi. So thank you. Because I'm going to read a poem about trains and also about Cambridge. And I don't have a book yet, which is very interesting and also very I feel deeply honored to be reading with Sandra and Lloyd, because they are really people I admire, and people I read, and people who I consider sort of really big and huge. So thank you for having me here. A small regret. The man on the train to Cambridge carried in his throat pieces of the pink sky. It was like a dream. It was no dream. His bed raking the sidewalks of my ear as he scissored his body through the door. How often I've chanced upon tenderness only to hurry on with the drudgery of living. Seated, he angled himself off the exit, his mouth pressed open like any seeded fruit, yellow cocoa pods, apricot. He exhaled the fog braced to the inside him, the steam settling into the empty, worn grey cushions of the train. Outside, the audio buzz of wet bodies exiting early closed coffee shops. Outside, a fevered world readying itself for emergency. In the after hours of memory, I retraced the tangled forestry of his fingers coiled up into half moons, the lapidary of worn knuckles, half beaten into the shape of my own faceless hunger. What can I give that I have not yet given? An armload of all those empty and solitary hours I gathered with their precise pauses, a spare tweed scarf perhaps, whatever I have and whatever I've not yet given. So I'm going to also read this poem. So these two poems I usually consider them arrival poems, and to think of myself or to think about strangers and people who move from one place to another, the immediate interest they develop and also the shock that they encounter while meeting the new cities, and also the people, the hospitality and the joy of moving, of finding a place, settled, and also trying to articulate the connection you've built with people you just met. Because for me, being on the internet means that you know a place long enough before you come there, and you grow connections, and you know people long enough before you meet them face to face. So this new poem is about New York, and the shock of being there in my first snowstorm. And all that, the snow falling, which is very beautiful, but then when you walk on it, begins to lose its magic. So yeah, this poem is titled An Arrival in Winter. It is snowing in New York. It's the best second of my life. Everywhere I turn, a blue sun behind telephone lines, stripped poplar twigs, the postmodern glow of glass doors and frost-blown windows. Acorn coves wrapped in tin foils of snow show up in the backyard garden like my undelivered goodbyes. We traveled in an unredacted time loop to get here. 2 days over flooded cities and a grisly sky. 5 weeks stuck in an old shipyard. Today, I'm home and the kitchen is not yet on fire. Instead, the laughter of the neighbors' children rattles the back doors like the sweaty paws of stray dogs. I lick salt out of their pink ingots and empty unused ice cubes into crystal decanters arranged on the countertop by size. The ghosts of dead friends bubble up in the mist like amethyst. We break bread, by which I mean microwave wafers under the heaving brow of America. New dreams dissolve in the mud tracks of old ones. This morning, on a stroll through Central Park, the sharp tooth of exile announced itself in the shallow footprint of a cotton-tailed rabbit. The distance between New York and Nigeria got light, and then receded into mirror droplets of thawing snow, hanging gingerly by the tip of a stubborn leaf. I will admit it. I've always coveted these icicles, their crusty shine and resilience from the time I saw them in a picture book. As for the leaf, I do not envy it. I too have practiced the patience of holding on to dead hopes and wooden rafts adrift at sea, only to crash into the bucolic kingdom of rot. Yesterday, we climbed into bed with the low light of old stories, and the sky turned its back on us. The city lowered its able toward the minuses, and we huddled in the basilica of donated quilts. All night, the coiled radiator hissed by the corner before spreading its yellow light from the grounds up like plantar fascia. So I'm currently working on my first manuscript, poetry manuscript, and it's kind of collection of poems of the aftermath, writing about Nigerian history, but the ones I encountered and the ones whose cause I met. So, which is to say, I'm writing about the Nigerian Biafra Civil War. It's that I didn't live through it, so what is left of it are stories that my parents told me, and particularly my grandmother, who was so fond of telling stories, and telling stories not particularly about the casualties, but telling stories about foraging for mushrooms and yeah. So reading this poem titled "Emergency." To think that Biafra started as a refugee camp and then became a resettlement camp, and then a refugee camp again for the years the war lasted. That it was blockaded and starved, blockaded and starved. To think that an army tank stood between him and his daughter's last. Papa, sing me that song again. To think that the bullet hit him mid-sentence, mid-song, his jaw shattered, a shard of song stranded on the corpse side of his tongue. And to think of him now as a poet of a frothy and ongoing silence. To think how easily a body would stop before a sentence does. To think the bullet as an imposed period inserted in the ear of a wounded, faltering voice pressed for time. And to see each subsequent period as the dark mouth of a gun, as a bullet fired, misapplied, to understand that language itself is an ongoing emergency. So because much of the city, much of the region changed. When I was growing up, there were hardly any physical sort of markers suggesting that there was even a civil war. And oftentimes when you hear these stories as a child, it was difficult for us to reconcile the horror of it with the evidence that we heard. So, and it was when I came to the US that I started looking for an approach, a perspective to use to enter the stories that I've heard. And it was quite recently that the landscape itself, emerged as a motif in my work, and I've been trying to use it to save myself from this sort of horrible feeling of homesickness, and also as a way to articulate what the geography means to me, the land, the people. Of course, I don't have the rest sort of connection with it, and that distance has heightened my own affinity to the land itself and to the plants and all of that. So, and also some specific bold regional markers like the bridge, the Niger Bridge, which I often, if you're coming into the Southeast, you're going to pass it. If you're leaving, it's also the last bold landscape that you encounter. So this poem is titled "The Bridge." In the morning, the bridge harbors lines of rock pigeons and the chime of sandpipers coiling out of reeds in the waters below. Gauze light floating downriver on a short lawn, what the fishermen say of the sunrise, which opens against the tides, then closes back up. During the war, bales of rebel flags bellowed in the breeze from the oil towers. During the war, the strong Catholic nun from the pillar abutment pointing north-west across waste waters, the tine of a frayed dagger poked out of the blown mast of her blue and white habit. Yes, even the easterly carries daylight and the word to us, like sheets of black snow falling down the mountains. Your own body, unruly, like fields of bluebells breaking open in late spring. Dead skin and seepage, triangular branches, the dry bulb of a robin's nest, and that lone, unhatched egg rolling in the center like a chipped bell. Your eyelashes are grinding themselves to fleas, to fiber wool, so that bice clouds drift between the floodplain's open heart and the dry sense of light. Yes, sunlight. It travels in runes of leftover rain, kisses your hands, and again you mistake it for the drafty cross those passing bullets leave behind. I have been teaching my hands lately to practice porosity, surrender, as if this life is a fiddle where virtuosity could be attained, rehearsed, and put to instant use. Yes, your hand, it strings the wind into a rough and hearty koan, air in air, a twirling yarrow stalk full of vinegar and sap. That robin is the robin shifting the blue clouds like lace curtains in search of that one unhatched egg. Her wings, sleek as it sluices across the blue chasm, obsidian, same as your hands, folding my fat crusted ribs like laundry white. Body, you must learn to open and bow and let go. You may resist anything but light. So this is the second to last poem before, the last poem is a little bit longer, so these shorter poems. The Last Prayer. A halved face anyway, a ruin, like a bloody mouth, unworthy. There is something a broken mirror cannot see. Once I looked at these scars and found them too violent to be lonely. I called them cities, Timbuktu, Egypt without the crush of bricks. In the trance, a red wingless bug crawled up the stove. I snatched it into a bowl of foamy water, just to find something to save. He speaks into a crack on the wall. Hot bullets miss my ears. My father, who is halfway gone, whose resurrection was ruined by a crooked finger. I ask this of shame. Be a stranger. Stay out of the door. If there be bone or thorn, if there be gospels according to salt, let it enter even the wound's hidden face. Let the honeyed cotton fall. Let the wind take just small enough to fill the mouth. Let the ocean take without confessing death to hunger. So this last poem, it came out of a great sort of difficulty, but a difficulty of craft, not necessarily And I was trying to find an entry point, and I thought I was watching a lot of opera, and didn't know how to. It's such a high art, and poetry is frustrating, so I didn't know how to sort of combine that sort of leisure I've been indulging myself in, and also this poetry that I needed to finish and submit for workshops. So I borrowed some kind of style from opera and composed it. It's a little bit dramatic, at least for me, even though my teacher said it's fine, but like, yeah, just wanted to put that out here. It's a sonnet, but then composed in 14 sections, it's against 14 lines. Yeah. A sonnet. Has there ever been a country that once colonized, avoided civil wars? Roman time. 1. Still the unmarked graves between history and here. Still the shimmer of old coasts crawling out of new manholes in the street. By the old mission church near the hill, which one windy morning turned chalky grey and collapsed, my mother holds me the way a frozen shroud of memory clings to a body, like a burgeoning sail, like a small but surely souring fruit. It could be cancer, you know. Except that in the event of an unmentionable, memory reorganizes itself into a large and living organ. In its sooty and heavy gabardine, it sidles right next to the heart. It could be, you know. 2. Here is the harbor where it all began. Here is the sand, the gnarled and towering sepulchre of salt, coming and going in high tide, coming and going, but never going away. As Derek Walcott wrote, the sea is history. And dare I add language to that, and dare I add bone to that, and dare I add my people, their stories in all of Abyssinia, Burma, Biafra, their termite-chopped language, their mouths cindered to echo in the white man's war, tattered, relentless in my ear. 3. It is April, it is 1968. Concertinas of debris rise to meet the animal clouds of heat. My mother, with pink ribbons flapping from her cornrows, unfolds the scenes of crumbled cement plasters. She pulls out her father, a dead thing. January, she mourns the Hamilton days of a lost childhood until there are no woods in the bushes to bring another tea kettle to boil. Playgrounds give up their jingle over swings, become battlegrounds for baboon blood politics. The song of ice cream trucks ride home in the belly of a wailing Red Cross van. The slaughtered are canned in wooden boxes and loaded onto cargo trains bound for the east. The slaughtered are buried in the rain until the bodies of the slaughtered disappear from checkpoints stolen by the government. A boy strapped to a gurney holds up a loose arm like a brand new microphone. He croons in the white of a popped bone on cause in the immaculate echo of a burning country. How is this for a sharp poem? An air raid so lethal, it scrubbed an entire country off the map. How is this for a poem? The spaces between one war and another. Diary entry. August 10, 1969. A human figure, likely a female, is seen through thick drapes of tarpaulin walking the city. She is surveying the ransacked pantry of a bombed maternity ward. She stuffs 2 loaves of bread, maybe lead, into her purse. A soldier is riding her like a bicycle. First Christmas of the war, She eats only the fishbone of her fear. Her grief grows fat rings on the neck. For the rest of the war, she picks loose ears of shrapnel, grenade pins, a plastic husk that once held bullets. Who would say the dead have been silent in all of this? Who would say their ghosts had had a second in the sun? Exhume these bodies. Let every bone be given back its pink and manifold tongue. If you've heard this before, chances are I lost you in the colonial project. No, in the air raid. No, in the widely denied genocide. I'm dead in that language. 2 bullets to my head, the English language brick heavy on my tongue, deluge brimming with seaweed water, the wreckage salty, turning year-long in the sun like a village of corpses. She says, this is the season of remembrance. As it is with egrets and seagull, so it is with ghosts. They are coming home. To the east, a dispatch, a spontaneous quivering in the long unbroken chain of events. To the west, a dull bungalow lit with recycled kerosene lamps. An almanac hangs on the kitchen wall with the year 1967 sickled in faded green. Slabs of edible clay, alligator peppers, crumbs of cassava bread bought and eaten before the blockade. Inside a family album, all the able-bodied men are missing. Years later, my mother stands behind the window lattice, a dark world pretending at sunlight, fractals of the collapsed church, dog-eared albums, the colonizer's language fattening itself with new titles of pain, with bones it crushed to make sweet English sweet. There is a piece of me in there too, my mother says. Cannibal, you slop me up goodly, no, fluently, tongue to throat to time-infused honey. Oh, honey, oh, English, boneyard, slaughterfield. Here comes all my dead again, emerging like a choir of cicadas from their post-diluvian sleep. They flicker like bonfire tongues. They are resplendent in their tutus. Thank you so much.
I guess I'm next. Hi, I'm Lloyd Schwartz, and I can't resist because I have my book in this book bag that was a present from the Academy of American Poets. Read more poems. Couldn't be more appropriate. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking about Sandra being a little nervous, starting with a poem by Rilke, and I'm going to start with a poem by Ifeanyi. And then I'm going to read a few poems by great poets who loved the Grolier and who visited the Grolier. And this is, I have to say, this is just my favorite poem by Ifeanyi. And I can hear him read it, and I am not
trying to imitate him, but I do hear him in my head. Fish heads. Big head of a fish, wet eyes cooking in the pot. Oh, I love fish heads when they simmer. And English folks cannot understand why Indians and Africans love fish heads, eh? In London, the landlady got so mad at them, she threw them out of the building for cooking fish heads all the time and messing up the hallways with fish smell. And we have considered the lilies and how they grow, fed by God's abundant mercy. But the lilies eat manure, and a diet of manure is not nearly as good as a diet of fish heads. So let the English eat manure, like the lilies in their Bible. As for us, fish heads when they simmer. The wonderful poet David Ferry has recently turned 98. He wishes he could be here tonight, and I would like to read a short poem by David called An Alphabet. ABC, you and me. DEF, dumb and deaf. GHI, blind of eye. JKL, what's to tell? MNO, all you know. PQR, who you are. STU, who are you? VWX, stones and sticks. YZ, you and me. When I first came to Cambridge, and one of the reasons I came to Cambridge was to meet Robert Lowell. And Robert Lowell was a habitué of the Grolier. And this is his poem about his friend and fellow poet, Randall Jarrell. It's one of Lowell's sonnets about other poets. Randall Jarrell by Robert Lowell. The dream went like a rake of sliced bamboo, slats of dust distracted by a downdraw. I woke and knew I held a cigarette. I looked. There was none. Could have been none. I slept off years before I woke again, palming the floor, shaking the sheets. I saw nothing was burning. I awoke. I saw I was holding 2 lighted cigarettes. They come this path, old friends, old buffs of death. Tonight, it's Randall, his spark still fire, though humble, his gnawed wrist cradled like kitten. Quote, what kept you so long, racing the cooling grindstone of your ambition? You didn't write, you rewrote. But tell me, Cal, Why did we live? Why do we die? This is a poem that I am sure most of you know. It's probably the most famous poem now by another poet who lived in Cambridge and who loved the Grolier, Elizabeth Bishop. One Art. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. Well, great poets, and what a pleasure to hear Sandra and Chibuihe be on a program with them. First time. And thank you so much for your reading. And I'm going to read a few of my own poems to end with. One of the things that I was talking to Ifeanyi about maybe a year or so before he died had something to do with my connection with the Brazilian community in Boston. I had been to Brazil many times because Elizabeth Bishop lived in Brazil, and I was doing a lot of work on Elizabeth Bishop. And so Ifeanyi wanted to, to do something connected, something at the Grolier connected with the communities of people from other countries, including Brazil. And that didn't quite happen. But this is a short poem called Renato's Dream. And it refers to some great Brazilian poets. Renato's Dream. Such a sweet dream. I dreamed I was having a conversation with the great poets, Manuel Bandeira and Carlos Drummond de Andrade. I was born tired, hungry, and cold, I said. And Drummond answered, I too. This is a poem about my mother. It's called No Orpheus? I think one of the reasons that I chose the poems that I'm reading tonight have something to do with memory and elegy and remembering people, places we love. No Orpheus. And it begins with a little epigraph about Orpheus. When he sang of what had passed, the trees would lean toward him. He could suspend the suffering of the damned. He could bring back the dead. Don't look back. Hell is a spotless room overlooking the ocean. She wants out. I'm heading for nowhere. What do I have to look forward to? She used to have a future and a past. I'm lost. I'm like a stranger to myself. I'm an unstationary pedestal. My marbles are slowly rolling away. She's thrown out family photos, no longer recalls her husband or her maiden name. Still, she wants him to lead her back. When am I going to see you? Are we a long distance apart from one another? He wants her back. He wants her back. If it took only not looking back to lead her back, it would be easy not to look back. But if helping her back is the one way he knows to help her back, then he has to help her look back. Where else could she look? I'll try not to remember too many things. I'll just remember what I can. Do we? Don't we have more he wishes he knew than what we can look back to? I'm going to read two more poems. And two more poems. I noticed that I'm going to repeat one unusual word that was in one of Chibuihe's poems. I hadn't intended that. Here it is. Nostalgia, the lake at night. The black water. Lights dotting the entire perimeter. Their shaky reflections. The dark tree line. The plapping of water around the pier. Creaking boats. The creaking pier. Voices in conversation, in discussion. Two men, adults, serious inflections. The words themselves just out of reach. A rusty screen door spring, then the door swinging shut. Footsteps on a porch, the scrape of a wooden chair. Footsteps shuffling through sand. Animated, youthful voices, how many? Distinct, disappearing. A sudden guffaw, some giggles, a young girl's sarcastic reply. Someone's assertion, a high-pitched male cackle. Somewhere else, a child laughing, bug zappers, tires whirring along a pavement, not stopping, receding. Shadows from passing headlights. Excuse me. A cat's eyes caught in a headlight. No moon. Connect the dot constellations filling the black sky. The ladle of the Big Dipper not quite directly overhead. The radio tower across the lake signaling. Muffled quacking near the shore. A frog belching. Crickets, cicadas, katydids, etc. Their relentless sexual messages. A sudden gust of wind. Branches brushing against each other. Pine, beach. A fiberglass hull tapping against the dock. A sudden chill. The smell of smoke, wood stove fires. A light going out. A dog barking, then more barking from another part of the lake. A burst of quiet laughter. Someone in the distance calling someone too loud. Steps on a creaking porch. A screen door spring, the door banging shut. Another light going out. You must have just undressed for bed. My bare feet on the splintery pier, turning away from the water. That's a poem that, that was a poem that I think could have taken place just around this time of year. And this last poem is something that we look forward to, or is a little bit ahead of us. It's called Leaves. It's 3 sonnets. Leaves. 1. Every October, it becomes important, no, necessary, to see the leaves turning, to be surrounded by leaves turning. It's not just the symbolism, to confront in the death of the year your death, one blazing farewell appearance, though the irony isn't lost on you, that nature is most seductive when it's about to die, flaunting the dazzle of its incipient exit, an ending that at least so far the effects of human progress, pollution, acid rain, have not yet frightened you enough to make you believe is real. That is, you know this ending is a deception, because of course nature is always renewing itself. The trees don't die, they just pretend, go out in style, and return in style, a new style. 2. Is it deliberate how far they make you go, especially if you live in the city, to get far enough away from home to see not just trees, but only trees? The boring highways, road signs, high speeds, 10-axle trucks passing you as if they were in an even greater hurry than you to look at leaves. So you drive in terror for literal hours, and it looks like rain or snow, but it's probably just clouds. Too cloudy to see any color. And you wonder, given the poverty of your memory, which road had the most color last year. But it doesn't matter, since you're probably too late anyway, or too early. Whichever road you take will be the wrong one, and you've probably come all this way for nothing. 3. You'll be driving along depressed when suddenly a cloud will move and the sun will muscle through and ignite the hills. It may not last, probably won't last, but for a moment the whole world comes to, wakes up, proves it lives. It lives. Red, yellow, orange, brown, russet, ochre, vermilion, gold, flame and rust. Flame and rust, the permutations of burning. You're on fire. Your eyes are on fire. It won't last. You don't want it to. You can't stand anymore. But you don't want it to stop. It's what you've come for. It's what you'll come back for. It won't stay with you, but you'll remember that it felt like nothing else you felt, or something you felt that also didn't last.
Thank you again for coming. There's some refreshments out in the lobby, so enjoy.